You probably know Leonardo da Vinci's famous fresco of the Last Supper. It shows Jesus in the center, surrounded by his disciples. But what you may not have realized is that Jesus is also at the center of the linear perspective, also known as the vanishing point. We can see that by adding a few simple lines following the perspective in this fresco. Let's start with a line along the ceiling on the left, and then a similar line following the direction of the ceiling on the right. They intersect, right in the face of Jesus. And then let's follow the direction of both walls. Again, the same intersection point. And again, when we follow the lines on the side of the tables, they all end up in exactly the same point. And this is called one point or single point linear perspective. And that concept will be illustrated in this video. Up until the year 1420, paintings looked like this. There was very limited depth in paintings, like in these works by Giotto. But from the 1420s onwards, under the lead of Filippo Brunelleschi, artists started to experiment with linear perspective, like in this work from 1424 by Masolino. To explain it in simple words, it means that the size of objects becomes smaller the further away they are from the observer, and that there is a vanishing point. In the simplest case, a single vanishing point. Just as with Da Vinci's fresco, painted some 75 years later, we can do that with Masolino's work. Let's draw a line following the direction of the house on the left. Somewhere on this line is the vanishing point. Now let's do the same for the top of the building. As you can see, both lines intersect at the same point with the first line. This is again the vanishing point. To verify this, we can do the same with the building on the right side, and indeed all lines intersect at the same point. Let's do one final check with a building in the distance, and again it checks out. Let's check one more beautiful example from half a century later, when Perugino painted the delivery of the keys, which he painted on the walls of the Sistine Chapel. It shows Jesus handing the keys of heaven to Saint Peter. Perugino has made it easy for us to recognize the linear perspective by painting rectangular tiles on the floor. These form a grid, which many artists who paint this kind of three-dimensional views usually hide underneath the painting to help them get the perspective right. But here they are clearly visible, and if we trace the lines of the rectangular tiles, we can easily find the vanishing point. As you can see, by adding the vertical lines of the square, they all perfectly come together in the single place in the middle of the temple door. This is once again the vanishing point. These grid lines were also really helpful for another essential element of perspective, which is to get the size of all elements in the painting right. The simple idea is that objects in the foreground are larger than those in the background. When we trace the horizontal lines of the tiles, a clear grid becomes visible, and the distance between the horizontal lines becomes smaller and smaller the further we get to the background. As each tile is the same size in reality, it helps Perugino to determine the size of the people in each rectangle. The size of the figures between the fourth and fifth horizontal line, for example, is about the same, and those standing between the fifth and sixth horizontal line should be a little bit smaller, and so on. In reality, all figures are about the same size, but as some of them are further away than others, they have to be painted smaller in absolute size for our eyes to perceive them all of the same size. A term that is very much related to the idea that objects further away in space are smaller than those nearby is foreshortening. The practical difference is that foreshortening is usually used to refer to a single object or person that is painted. Foreshortening is basically an illusionary trick to create the idea of depth in a two-dimensional painting. The most famous example is probably the Lamentation of Christ painted by the end of the 15th century by Andrea Mantegna. The idea is here that the figure of Christ is laying with his feet towards us and his head away from us. The theory of linear perspective would thus tell us that the parts of the body that are further away from us should be smaller than those close to us. And while the general idea is easy, it is actually quite challenging to get the relative sizes of the various body parts right. To get a better idea of what Mantegna did, let's put a circle around his foot. And now put the same size circle on his torso. While our torso is larger in real life than our foot, and the torso is further away from us in this painting, Mantegna decreased the size of the torso. So far so good. But then let's put the same size circle also on the head. The head is almost the same size in the painting as the torso and the foot. But the head is smaller in real life than the torso, and it is further away from us in the painting than the torso. So that means it's not quite the right size. It's a little bit more complicated than this because of the angles at which both are painted, but I guess you get the main idea. Now I'm not here to criticize the talents of Mantegna, as he was not an architect who should have all dimensions right to the millimeter. He was an artist who wanted to make a powerful depiction of a very serious subject matter. And the face of Christ is more important in this painting than the torso, so why not make that a bit bigger than it should realistically be? It actually goes back to how artists painted in the period before linear perspective was developed, when the idea was quite simple. You did not need to get the perspective right, you just painted objects that were more important a bit bigger than objects that were less important. Like we can see here by the size of Mary on the right panel of the famous Wilton diptych. Now, to be honest, some of the ideas related to linear perspective were already understood to some extent before the early Renaissance, but they were never applied consistently and they were not worked out mathematically as would be done during the first half of the 15th century. And in this video, the concept of linear perspective is explained in very simple terms. But there's much more to learn about this. For example, the works discussed earlier are examples of one or single point perspective. Another clear example of this is the School of Athens by Raphael. But there's also two-point perspective. This work from 1651 by Gerard Haukgeest is one of the early works that successfully used this, which becomes clear if you follow the directions of the tiles on the floor. One vanishing point is just outside the painting on the left, the other one on the right side. And you can extend this even further, and if you want to learn more about that, I may do that in a future video. Just let me know in the comments below. Well, I hope you enjoyed this discussion on the history of linear perspective and foreshortening. And while I kept it somewhat easy here, there's much more to learn about these concepts. For example, here are some much more complicated examples of foreshortening by Michelangelo. They represent the figure of God in various complicated poses, which Michelangelo painted on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. But I'll leave it at this for this video. If you want to support the channel, please hit the like and subscribe buttons, and I hope to welcome you in another video soon. Thanks for watching.